Book 18, Eclipses. Narrated Abu Bakr. We were with Allah's Apostle when the sun eclipsed. Allah's Apostle stood up dragging his cloak till he entered the mosque. He led us in a 2-rakat prayer till the sun, eclipse, had cleared. Then the Prophet, PBUH, said, "The sun and the moon do not eclipse because of someone's death. So whenever you see these eclipses, pray and invoke Allah till the eclipse is over." Narrated Abu Mas'ud, the Prophet said, "The sun and the moon do not eclipse because of the death of someone from the people, but they are 2 signs amongst the signs of Allah. When you see them, stand up and pray." Narrated Ibn Umar, the Prophet said, "The sun and the moon do not eclipse because of the death or life, that is birth, of someone, but they are 2 signs amongst the signs of Allah. When you see them, offer the prayer." Narrated Al-Mughira bin Shu'bah, the sun eclipsed in the lifetime of Allah's Apostle on the day when his son, Ibrahim, died. So the people said that the sun had eclipsed because of the death of Ibrahim. Allah's Apostle said, "The sun and the moon do not eclipse because of the death or life, that is birth, of someone. When you see the eclipse, pray and invoke Allah." Narrated Aisha, in the lifetime of Allah's Apostle, PBUH, the sun eclipsed, so he led the people in prayer, and stood up and performed a long qiyam, then bowed for a long while. He stood up again and performed a long qiyam, but this time the period of standing was shorter than the first. He bowed again for a long time but shorter than the first one, then he prostrated and prolonged the prostration. He did the same in the second rak'ah as he did in the first, and then finished the prayer. By then the sun, eclipse, had cleared. He delivered the khutbah, sermon, and after praising and glorifying Allah he said, "The sun and the moon are 2 signs against the signs of Allah, they do not eclipse on the death or life of anyone. So when you see the eclipse, remember Allah and say takbir, pray and give sadaqah." The Prophet then said, "O followers of Muhammad, by Allah, there is none who has more ghera, self-respect, than Allah, as he has forbidden that his slaves, male or female, commit adultery, illegal sexual intercourse. O followers of Muhammad, by Allah, if you knew that which I know, you would laugh little and weep much." Narrated Abdullah bin Amr, when the sun eclipsed in the lifetime of Allah's Apostle, an announcement was made that a prayer was to be offered in congregation. Narrated Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, PBUH, in the lifetime of the Prophet the sun eclipsed and he went to the mosque and the people aligned behind him. He said the takbir, starting the prayer, and prolonged the recitation, from the Quran, and then said takbir and performed a prolonged bowing. Then he lifted his head and said, "Sami Allahu liman hamida." Allah heard him who sent his praises to him. He then did not prostrate but stood up and recited a prolonged recitation which was shorter than the first recitation. He again said takbir and then bowed, a prolonged bowing but shorter than the first one, and then said, "Sami Allahu liman hamida Rabbana walak alhamd." Allah heard him who sent his praises to him. "O our sustainer, all the praises are for you," and then prostrated and did the same in the second rak'ah. Thus he completed 4 bowing and 4 prostrations. The sun, eclipse, had cleared before he finished the prayer. After the prayer, he stood up, glorified and praised Allah as he deserved, and then said, "The sun and the moon are 2 of the signs of Allah. They do not eclipse because of the death or the life, that is birth, of someone. When you see them, make haste for the prayer." Narrated Az-Zuhri, I said to Ursa, when the sun eclipsed at Medina, your brother, Abdullah bin Az-Zubair, offered only a 2-rakat prayer like that of the morning, Fajr, prayer. Ursa replied, "Yes, for he missed the Prophet's tradition concerning this matter." Narrated Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, on the day when the sun Kasafat, eclipsed, Allah's Apostle prayed. He stood up and said takbir and recited a prolonged recitation, then he performed a prolonged bowing, then he raised his head and said, "Sami Allahu liman hamida," and then remained standing and recited a prolonged recitation which was shorter than the first. Then he performed a prolonged bowing which was shorter than the first. Then he prostrated and prolonged the prostration, and he did the same in the second rak'ah as in the first, and then finished the prayer with taslim. By that time the sun, eclipse, had cleared, he addressed the people and said, "The sun and the moon are two of the signs of Allah, they do not eclipse, Yoxifan, because of the death or the life, that is birth, of someone. So when you see them, make haste for the prayer." Narrated Abu Bakr, Allah's Apostle said, "The sun and the moon are two signs amongst the signs of Allah, and they do not eclipse because of the death of someone, but Allah frightens his devotees with them." Narrated Amr bint Abdurrahman, a Jewess came to ask Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, about something. She said to her, "May Allah give you refuge from the punishment of the grave." So Aisha asked Allah's Apostle, would the people be punished in their graves? Allah's Apostle, after seeking refuge with Allah from the punishment of the grave, and thus replied in the affirmative. Then one day, Allah's Apostle rode to go to some place, but the sun eclipsed. He returned in the forenoon and passed through the rear of the dwellings of his wives, and stood for the eclipse prayer, and the people stood behind him. He stood up for a long period and then performed a prolonged bowing which was shorter than the first bowing. Then he raised his head and prostrated. Then he stood up, for the second rak'ah, for a long while, but the standing was shorter than that of the first rak'ah. Then he performed a prolonged bowing which was shorter than the first one. Then he raised his head and prostrated. Then he stood up for a long time but shorter than the first. Then he performed a prolonged bowing but shorter than the first. Then he raised his head and prostrated and finished the prayer, and then delivered the sermon and said as much as Allah wished. And then he ordered the people to seek refuge with Allah from the punishment of the grave. Narrated Abdullah bin Amr, when the sun eclipsed in the lifetime of Allah's Apostle, and an announcement was made that the prayer was to be held in congregation. The Prophet performed 2 bowing in 1 rak'ah. Then he stood up and performed 2 bowing in 1 rak'ah. Then he sat down and finished the prayer, and by then their eclipse had cleared. Aisha said, "I had never performed such a long prostration." Narrated Abdullah bin Abbas, the sun eclipsed in the lifetime of the Prophet, pbuh. Allah's Apostle offered the eclipse prayer and stood for a long period equal to the period in which one could recite Surat al-Baqarah. Then he bowed for a long time and then stood up for a long period which was shorter than that of the first standing, then bowed again for a long time but for a shorter period than the first. Then he prostrated twice and then stood up for a long period which was shorter than that of the first standing, then he bowed for a long time which was shorter than the previous one, and then he raised his head and stood up for a long period which was shorter than the first standing, then he bowed for a long time which was shorter than the first bowing, and then prostrated twice, and finished the prayer. By then, the sun eclipse had cleared. The Prophet then said, "The sun and the moon are 2 of the signs of Allah. They eclipse neither because of the death of somebody nor because of his life, that is birth. So when you see them, remember Allah." The people say, "O Allah's Apostle, we saw you taking something from your place and then we saw you retreating." The Prophet replied, "I saw paradise and stretched my hands towards a bunch of its fruits, and had I taken it, you would have eaten from it as long as the world remains. I also saw the hellfire and I had never seen such a horrible sight. I saw that most of the inhabitants were women." The people asked, "O Allah's Apostle, why is it so?" The Prophet replied, "Because of their ungratefulness." It was asked whether they are ungrateful to Allah. The Prophet said, "They are ungrateful to their companions of life, husbands, and ungrateful to good deeds. If you are benevolent to one of them throughout the life and if she sees anything undesirable in you, she will say, 'I have never had any good from you.'" Narrated Fatima bint al-Munda, Isma bint al-Bakr said, "I came to Aisha the wife of the Prophet, pbuh, during the solar eclipse. The people were standing and offering the prayer and she was also praying too. I asked her, 'What has happened to the people?' She pointed out with her hand towards the sky and said, 'Subhanallah.' I said, 'Is there a sign?' She pointed out in the affirmative. Asma further said, 'I too then stood up for the prayer till I fainted and then poured water on my head. When Allah's Apostle had finished his prayer, he thanked and praised Allah and said, 'I have seen at this place of mine what I have never seen, even paradise and hell. No doubt, It has been inspired to me that you will be put to trial in the graves like or nearly like the trial of Masih ad-Dajjal. I do not know which one of the two. Isma said, the angels will come to every one of you and will ask, what do you know about this man, that is Muhammad? The believer or a firm believer, I do not know which word. Isma said, will reply, he is Muhammad, Allah's apostle, pbuh, who came to us with clear evidences and guidance, so we accepted his teachings, believed and followed him. The angels will then say to him, sleep peacefully, as we knew surely that you were a firm believer. The hypocrite or doubtful person, I do not know which word. Isma said, will say, I do not know. I heard the people saying something, so I said it, the same. Narrated Isma, no doubt the Prophet ordered people to manumit slaves during the solar eclipse. Narrated Amr bint Abdurrahman, a Jewess came to Aisha to ask her about something, and then she said, may Allah give you refuge from the punishment of the grave. So Aisha asked Allah's apostle, would the people be punished in their graves? Allah's apostle asked Allah's refuge from the punishment of the grave, indicating an affirmative reply. Then one day Allah's apostle rode to leave for some place, but the sun eclipsed. He returned on the forenoon and passed through the rear of the dwellings of his wives, and stood up and started offering the eclipse prayer, and the people stood behind him. He stood for a long period and then performed a long bowing, and then stood straight for a long period which was shorter than that of the first standing. Then he performed a prolonged bowing which was shorter than the first bowing. Then he raised his head and prostrated for a long time, and then stood up for the second rak'ah for a long while, but the standing was shorter than the standing of the first rak'ah. Then he performed a prolonged bowing which was shorter than that of the first one. He then stood up for a long time but shorter than the first, then again performed a long bowing which was shorter than the first, and then prostrated for a shorter while than that of the first prostration. Then he finished the prayer and delivered the sermon and said what Allah wished, and ordered the people to seek refuge with Allah from the punishment of the grave. Narrated Abu Mas'ud, Allah's apostle said, the sun and the moon do not eclipse because of someone's death or life, but they are two signs amongst the signs of Allah, so pray whenever you see them. Narrated Aisha, in the lifetime of the Prophet the sun eclipsed, and the Prophet, pbuh, stood up to offer the prayer with the people and recited a long recitation. Then he performed a prolonged bowing, and then lifted his head and recited a prolonged recitation which was shorter than the first. Then he performed a prolonged bowing which was shorter than the first, and then lifted his head and performed two prostrations. He then stood up for the second rak'ah and offered it like the first. Then he stood up and said, the sun and the moon do not eclipse because of someone's life or death, but they are two signs amongst the signs of Allah which he shows to his worshippers. So whenever you see them, make haste for the prayer. Narrated Abu Musa, the sun eclipsed and the Prophet got up, being afraid that it might be the hour, that is day of judgment. He went to the mosque and offered the prayer with the longest qiyam, bowing and prostration that I had ever seen him doing. Then he said, these signs which Allah sends do not occur because of the life or death of somebody, but Allah makes his worshippers afraid by them. So when you see anything thereof, proceed to remember Allah, invoke him and ask for his forgiveness. Narrated Al-Mughira bin Shu'bah, on the day of Ibrahim's death, the sun eclipsed and the people said that the eclipse was due to the death of Ibrahim, the son of the Prophet. Allah's apostle said, the sun and the moon are two signs amongst the signs of Allah. They do not eclipse because of someone's death or life. So when you see them, invoke Allah and pray till the eclipse is clear. Narrated Abu Bakr, in the lifetime of the Prophet the sun eclipsed and then he offered a 2-rakat prayer. Narrated Abu Bakr, in the lifetime of the Allah's apostle, pbuh, the sun eclipsed and he went out dragging his clothes till he reached the mosque. The people gathered around him and he led them and offered 2-rakat. When the sun eclipse cleared, he said, the sun and the moon are two signs amongst the signs of Allah, they do not eclipse because of the death of someone, and so when an eclipse occurs, pray and invoke Allah till the eclipse is over. It happened that a son of the Prophet called Ibrahim died on that day, and the people were talking about that, saying that the eclipse was caused by his death. Narrated Aisha, the Prophet led us and performed 4 bowing in 2 rakat during the solar eclipse, and the first rakah was longer. Narrated Aisha, the Prophet, pbuh, recited the Quran aloud during the eclipse prayer, and when he had finished the eclipse prayer he said the takbir and bowed. When he stood straight from bowing he would say Sami al-Allahu liman hamada rabbana wa lakal alhamd. And he would again start reciting. In the eclipse prayer there are 4 bowing and 4 prostrations in 2 rakat. Al-Awza'i and others said that they had heard a Zu'i from Musa from Aisha saying, in the lifetime of Allah's apostle the sun eclipsed, and he made a person to announce prayer in congregation. He led the prayer and performed 4 bowing and 4 prostrations in 2 rakat. Narrated Al-Walid that Abdurrahman bin Namir had informed him that he had heard the same. Ibn Shihab heard the same. Azul said, I asked, Sir, what did your brother Abdullah bin Az-Zubair do? He prayed 2 rakat of the eclipse prayer, like the morning prayer, when he offered the eclipse prayer in Median. Ursa replied that he had missed, that is, did not pray according to the Prophet's tradition. Sulayman bin Kathir and Sufyan bin Hussein narrated from Az-Zuhri that the prayer for the eclipse used to be offered with loud recitation.